Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Fitter and Faster Coaches Corner. I'm your host, as always, Mike Murray. Today, I have a coach and a business owner that needs no introduction to those of us in the swimming world. I'm very happy to share today's episode of Coaches Corner with Paris Jacobs. How are you, Paris?
I'm good, Mike. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I know you're super busy. We were very lucky to catch you in the middle of, I'm sure, a thousand different things. And we are really excited today to talk about swim biz and the business of swimming and the business of club coaching. I think it's something that young coaches aren't considering enough as they start their careers. You have a really interesting story with how you got your business up and running. And we want to really take both a 10,000 foot level and a deep dive into how you got started and the things that are motivating you now. You have been involved in a lot of different aspects of our sport, from club swimming to the national governing body, to the board of directors at ASCA, to working with the ISL. Paris, you have been seminally involved in so many different aspects of our sport, and it makes you a real expert on things that are happening in our sport. So why don't we start out today with just you explaining how you got into the swim business so that our young coaches who might be thinking of starting their own team or starting their own lesson program, what are some of those initial considerations you had, and how did Machine build into what it is today?
Thank you. Wow, gosh, that's a really long and big answer, but obviously Dan and I met Dan coaching. I was coaching for a club here in Potomac Valley. That's where we met. And, at the time we were coaching for that club, and, Dan and our former business partner, Christian Dowd, had a vision of kind of what they wanted a club to look like, and maybe, having their own club and doing those things. And so, they used to sit around in our living room. I remember it clearly, and kind of joke about this. And I was like, you guys are crazy. We're not doing this. And then through, a series of events, it became a reality. And the next thing we knew, okay, we are going to do this. We're going to start Machine Aquatics, which was in 2001. It was in April of 2001. A lot of people ask us all the time where our name came from. It actually came from our swimmers. When the swimmers who first joined and knew that we were going to be opening a team, said, why don't you call us Machine? Because you guys are always telling us how to biomechanically use our bodies and how to efficiently swim in the water, and to swim like machines. And we kind of were like, you know what, that's, not a bad idea. Our team colors actually came from, Dan had been a longtime coach for a summer league team here, as we all know, our bread and butter, right? We build our programs from our summer league. Their team color was green. Christian had been a summer league coach at another team. Their team color was orange. And so out of that came two of our primary colors for our team colors. And we started the club, as I said, in April of 2001 with a long course season, and then went straight into our first short course season that September. Actually, our very first day of practice here in Washington, D.C. area was September 11th, 2001. And so, we started under that, and really needing to be a place of security and safety for our community after everything that had just happened. Obviously, we didn't have practice that day. We did the next day, and everything kind of took off from there. Getting involved and needing to know what was happening. And to your question of, how did my career kind of start? Very accidentally, I will be honest. When we started Machine, as any coach who's left a club, jumped a club, started their own club, sometimes there's controversy. And, I'm not going to shy away from the fact that we started under some controversy because we had formerly been with another club. And frankly, no one would help us. We were the bad child of the LSC, right? And so I made some mistakes registering. At that time, it was just, again, remember, this is 20 plus years ago. was called before board of review by our LSC, where I literally kind of sat in front of the firing squad and they were all around the front, and here's me sitting there. And I just said, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to improperly register or not had kids registered in the meet. I didn't know. No one would help me. And we got fined, 20 years ago, brand new club. We got fined over $1,000. And I remember leaving just stunned. And one of the board members who was involved nationally came up to me and said, the way to not have this happen again is to get involved and know the rules. And I said, sir, you don't know me, but I just wrote you a check for over $1,000 as a brand new club. You're going to know me. And that, not in an arrogant way, but it was just like, okay, the only way, if I really want this, and Dan and Christian, all of us want this to be successful, we got to know the rules. We got to work from the inside out. And so it started there. And I started getting involved with the LSC, and then progressed to zone, was doing some stuff at the zone, and then progressed to national level and doing some national team managing of trips and camps. And as you said, then it went from there, right? Committees to this and that. But my philosophy behind it, really has always been, if we wanted our club to be the best that it could, we needed to be involved. We needed to have ownership in what was happening and professionalism. And then from there, really be able to say that this is a profession. We came, and we still struggle with this, right? That football coaches or basketball coaches or baseball coaches are looked at professionally, especially back then when you'd say to somebody, well, what do you do? I'm a swim coach. No, what's your real job? No, really, I'm a swim coach. So it was very important to us that the level of professionalism always existed within our club. And so that was the backbone of how everything came to be, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of stress. Actually, I went into labor with Dan and I's first daughter, and he kept saying, are you in labor? I'm like, I don't know, and we had 5 coaches at that point. I'm like, just go to the swim meet. Turns out I was in labor, and had to call him and try and find somebody to cover the swimmers, to meet me at the hospital. You name it, we did it. Kids on our backs going to practice, meeting in the parking lot, switching out, we just did what we had to do.
Sure. And I think people can really appreciate that picture of the early days. And when I remember the first interactions I had with Dan, obviously at the national level, and Christian, and I remember thinking to myself, and I was, 22, 23 years old, these guys are just having a lot of fun, and the kids are swimming really fast. And I think one thing that's been a really important part of your program and the development over the years is that you guys really enjoy the business of swimming.
We do. And that is all of us. And that goes down to everyone who is in our staff. We are a family, and we're really, really fortunate that, we still have people on our staff that have been with us since year one. We have people who've been with us since grew up swimming with us, or still with us. Blair Pittington, who's been with us a long time, grew up swimming with us, went to swim at college, came back coaching, still coaching, heads up our age group program now. We pride ourselves on being a family, and, in making sure, especially in this area where we are, that's such a highly competitive market, the very first thing I say to people is that we have a spot for everyone. As long as your expectations are kept in line with your commitment, we want you. As you and I talked about talking about branding and marketing and who you are in the community, I learned a very important lesson probably when my kids were like 8 or 9. I was timing at a summer league meet, and the person timing with me clearly didn't know who I was, and that sounds very egotistical, but not in that sense. And we were just chatting, and the people on other sides of me knew who I was, and so she's talking about swimming, and where she's asking questions, and I'm telling her things, and she finally says, gosh, you seem to really know a lot about swimming. Is this like a hobby of yours or something? And at that point, I'm like, all right, said, well, actually, I'm Paris Jacobs from I Own Machine Aquatics. And she's like, and she stops and she was mortified. And I was like, no, please. But she looked at me and said, great club, we're not good enough for that. We'll never be fast enough to be with you guys. And I'm like, whoa, wait. Like, and that was a moment that I had to come back to my staff and look at our branding and our marketing and our, what we were perceived as in the community and say, hang on, like, thank you, but no, that's not what we want to be. We want to be a place for all, as I said, as long as your expectations are kept in line with your commitment. And that was a lesson for me, right? Here's this stranger who just told me how we are perceived in the community.
Well, two things that I take away from that, Paris, is that you're very cognizant in that moment to make that mental note and bring it back to the business side. So not all coaches, when they first get started, might have a very high business acumen. And obviously, it's something that you can develop as you move on in your career. I remember one of the early quotes on a machine shirt was simply build it. It was machine, and then it said build it. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. Talk to me about those first early days when you were setting the vision for the club, what you wanted it to be, and then ultimately how you built these different arms of the company.
Sure. Well, you just nailed it. I mean, our very first tagline was build your own. And it still is to this day. That is our absolute company tagline. And some people get it, some people don't. I've had people who tell me, like, I don't understand what that means. And for us, it's primarily Dan and Christian as the coaches really at that time. I mean, yes, I was definitely still coaching, but they were coaching the higher levels, right? I mean, that we're going to give you the tools, we're going to work with you, but you have to build your own, right? You have to be responsible for everything that you do. And as we progressed through the years and we had other things that became kind of our secondary and third taglines, strength, integrity, and honor. That became our next one. That really wasn't just about swimming. It's about family. If Dan were sitting beside me, as he says to our parents every day or every year, at our parent night, family's first, and then school and then swimming. And if we can keep all of those in line in the pyramid, then it will all come together and it will all work, but we're going to give you the tools to build it. But you really got to build your own. And yes, I mean, as we moved through, the phases of our company that became Machine Brands and all the different things that we do, we had to take that philosophy as well. There's a lot of things that led us to taking the next steps. I'm very fortunate. I say this all the time. If anybody's ever attended one of my classes or talks, I did not swim in college. It took me until my 30s to acknowledge that the reason I didn't do that is because I simply didn't want to work that hard. Played another sport as a volleyball player. Swimming is hard. It takes massive dedication. It takes massive support, not only from the coach, but the family, the dedication. I remember the first time with our own daughter, who's now in college, that Dan was gone and she had moved to the 4:30 national group or national prep group. And I was like, oh God, that means I got to take her, those family commitment things. So as we moved through, as I said, I got fortunate enough that I got to take two things that I always loved. I went to school for business. I loved swimming. I was always a coach, even though I didn't swim in college. I coached summer league. I did all of that. And I got to put them together. And I forever will be grateful in that. I got very, very lucky in that sense.
Super, super fun how you were able to create that symbiosis with who you are as a person. Not every coach gets to do that.
They don't. And I will tell you, through all my years of mentoring coaches and working and in all of my various roles, I think the tragedy that happens that we have a lot of coaches that don't realize that they can do more, right? That they can go outside that box. And I think not in a bad way. I've used this analogy a few times. Whether it be consulting with a club, a board of directors who's trying to figure out what to do with their coach, or they feel like the coach doesn't realize their potential. For our coaches, everybody, success is measured in 1/100th of a second, and that's in the grand scheme, that's 1/100th of a second. I mean, that's just so little. And so I think kind of the inherent carry all from that is that then you have some coaches who go, this is all I can do because it's so minute, but it's so big at the same time. Really successful coaches can do so much more. And I do believe that coaches who understand the business side become such better coaches. They really, not saying they need to control everything, but within our machine family, nothing is a dictatorship here. The greatest ideas 90 times out of 10 I get are from my coaches coming to me and saying, we need to do this. My job now with overseeing all of our divisions is listening to the coaches. Why do we need this? What's it going to be? What is the end game we're trying to get to? And especially with Dan as the head coach after that and saying, there's times when he looks at me and says, we got to do it. And then my job becomes, I got to figure out the budget to make it happen, right? What are we giving up to make this, or how are we going to change? So I think really empowering the coaches to be a part of that process is very key to being successful long-term.
There's no doubt about it. And if you had asked me 10 years ago what I was thinking about in the preparation for a season, it would be, how are we going to get ready for Olympic trials? What's it going to take to get on the national team? Now it's
try to get you down here, man.
Now it's how are we trending membership wise? What's our budget going to look like? So, you evolve as a head coach and as a CEO into understanding that you can't do this without that first. And it's so critical, especially in terms of the long-term planning of your club. And I want to share, Paris, the PowerPoint that you sent me. And you could just talk about these slide by slide if you want.
Well, sure. So obviously I have helped, teach, write, to develop the level 5 business school for ASCA, for the American Swim Coaches Association. So some of these are pulled out of that very long class in a day. But, as we really get to what you and I talked about as far as brands and understanding what your brand is, as I kind of already alluded to, and who you are in the market and what that looks like, it's critical that anything that you do stays consistent with your brand, like we said. So build your own, or we're a machine family and all of that. So these are the current 4 divisions that we have here within our brand. We obviously started with Machine Aquatics, our team, that's our year-round swim team, in 2001. And, it was always a dream of mine to have a swim school. I'm not sure that it would be that back then it would be what it is today. And actually I realized our largest and biggest accomplishment actually isn't on here, but our performance center that I'm sitting in right now. But we wanted to have a swim school, and it became more real for us because what was happening at that time, and again, please remember the timing in the industry, there were not swim schools, there were not these franchises. We saw that boom about 10 years ago when the entrepreneur magazines and franchisees started identifying swim schools as one of the most profitable industries to be in. So then we started seeing, these people who were not necessarily swimmers coming into the market. But at that time, it was either clubs that owned swim schools or your county rec, YMCA, Red Cross, all of those. Nothing wrong with the programs, but what we found was there was a major gap between coming out of the program to being ready for a competitive team. And it was honestly starting to impact our brand in the community, because they would leave out of a level 6 or 8, whatever it was in that county program, being told, you're great, go. And then they would come to us and it was like, no, you're not quite ready yet. And parents would be upset, as we know. So from there, we decided this kept happening and we just said, okay, you know what, maybe it's time to start a swim school. So we opened our swim school. We got incredibly fortunate. There is a child whisperer here in our community. She's still sitting downstairs with us, Nancy Monahan, who called me up she was actually at another place and said, I heard you're looking to start a swim school. And I said, I am. Are you telling me that you'd be interested in coming? And she said, I've always wanted to be a part of the company. And yes, I would. And I'll tell you, I about fell out of my chair. And so we immediately hired Nancy as the director, and opened up using 2 of our team facilities that we were renting from. And I lived through a year and a half or so of her and Dan going back and forth about water temperature. One would turn it up, one would turn it down. And I mean, twice a week we would have these, we got to have it warmer. It's too warm for my athletes, all of this. And January 3rd, 2011, because it's our 10th year now, was walking out of a meeting from one of the facilities, and I was zoning out on the pool, and they were each on a side of me, and Dan says, I don't like that look. I know that look. What's going on? And said, there's only one way to solve this. We got to build a facility. And he thought I was nuts. And I did all the legwork, did it very quickly. We got very fortunate to find the facility here in the town that Dan grew up in. And November 1st of that year, we opened our first facility, which was then obviously Machine Swim School, which was the first purpose-built standalone swim school in our county. Everything else was county driven. Had that, and at the time, my assistant's husband is a big triathlon guy. He decided he wanted to make a career move, wanted to open a youth triathlon team, kind of came to me and said, what do you think about this? And initially I kind of paused because I'm not a triathlete person. I am a runner, I am a swimmer. I fall over standing still. So getting on a bike was not something that I was familiar with, but I thought about it. And the thing that occurred to us all was creating this triathlon division. And this was in 2014. In 14 into 15, could possibly provide a home for these senior swimmers who realize they're not going to swim in college, who realize that they're never going to make a national cut, but are pretty darn good swimmers. And if you know anything about triathlon, as I do now, that is the weakest leg for many triathletes. And so now we're creating an environment where possibly they could stay, they could swim, and bike and run and see how it goes. And so I said, okay, let's do it. I said, but here's the deal. You got to run it. I'll oversee the business, but I know nothing. It's been great. Fast forward 2 years, Andrew's done great things at that point. We became a high performance club. We were funded by USA Tri. 4 years in, we were putting people on the national podium, on the world podium. They actually were just down in Fort Myers in a qualifier last weekend. They're heading to Sarasota Thursday. So still going, and then out of that came our next phase. 3 years ago, our swim school had been doing great. We decided to expand it. And so now we have what's called Machine Performance Center, which is where I am now up in our offices, but it is a 24,000 square foot multi-use performance center that has swimming, biking. We have a bike shop, M3 Bike. Now we have a CompuTrainer studio. We have physical fitness. We partnered with PT Solutions. So we have physical therapy here. We have TRX. We have all of our national team dryland here pre-COVID. But it became a way of looking at it and saying, how do we bring everything in-house? We were spending all this money in other places, and we took another leap of faith, and lots of lessons learned with that build out. And then same thing, gosh, as I talk about in a future slide, don't be afraid to take a chance, and don't be afraid to know when it doesn't work. When we expanded, our team sponsor, our team dealer for the triathlon division at that time was looking to move. So we brought him into the facility, moved the bike shop here. Funny story, a lot of things just kept happening. And my business partner, Andrew's now our business development director at the time. And came to me and said, things not working. And I was heading to the ASCA offices. And I said, look, at this point, I don't really care what the solution is, but either by Friday, I want the keys, or, I want them out, one of the two. And I want this signed. And he called me that Thursday night and said, guess what? We own a bike shop. Not expecting, but Andrew and Allison have jumped in. It's a part of our division. It's their baby. They handle it. And, didn't work in the beginning, but we made it work in the end. So
it's so cool, Paris, because all of these things have now kind of become their own company, but they help drive so much success from a performance standpoint for the swim team.
They do. So, it's all founded in that. And again, that comes back to our core value, right? Like, we could sell all of it tomorrow, but the team is our baby. The team will never go anywhere. As every coach does. Dan's in his 50s. I'll leave it at that. He'd kill me for saying how old he is, but I tease him regularly. I'm like, is this quad like the one where we're going to start to step back? Oh yeah. And then there's always that next swimmer coming up, right? And maybe it'll be the next quad. So Lord knows when he'll step back, but that'll be the thing that we never let go of. It's what started all of this.
Well, I'll tell you, I've done 5 national select camps. I've had a machine athlete at all 5.
Well, thank you. That's a testament to our coaches.
Absolutely.
So if you go back real quick on that other slide, I think that's kind of really, if you don't mind, because I think, this is a really big one, because I do get asked this a lot about brand awareness and, making sure, so Dan designed our logo. He designs all of our shirts. He actually was a graphic artist before we went to this full time. Our first 5 years of Machine, we had a graphic design company still, and that was fun. I was still running weddings and planning weddings. I mean, we were doing everything we could, right, to pay the bills. But I think when you start really looking at your brand and what you are and what you want to be, it has to align with your values. And that, I think that's a lot of times what is missed when people start talking about branding and being aware, is that it's more than just your team colors or your logo or catchphrase. I mean, and Mike, you've done it too. Work works. I see it all the time. I see it everywhere. I'm so mad we didn't think of it before you. But it's true, right? For you, it comes back to that. And, for us and our companies across, it has to come back to our values and who we are that builds our brand.
Yeah. So, and you can see all of these, these phrases that you've used over the years. You and I were talking in pre-production a little bit about how you've allowed the athletes to play a role in that. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So again, in building that brand awareness for a really long time, our designs, our shirts, everything just didn't vary. And I give Dan a lot of credit in that. Graphic designer, we had a dealer one time take a liberty with our logo. Yeah, that didn't go over very well. So, but as we moved through and we were, 10, 11 years, 12 years, I was like, okay, how many of the same shirt can we have? It's time. So he came up with a great idea within his national team and the kids as they were going to these different meets, as you were talking about, sweep the leg, Johnny, or, any of those things. Nobody puts baby in a corner. Those all came from the swimmers. And so, they get to put all these phrases together, send it to him. They boil it down to what it's going to be. They vote on it. Sometimes Dan overrides or vetoes, sometimes I do, but, it's really engaging them in the process. And then obviously when we're on the trip, they choose what shirt they wear the next day or what phrase they want, for the Saturday night finals with the 50 free, right? What they want the back of the shirt to say. So we really have brought them into that process, and it becomes kind of a reward for their hard work too.
Yeah, it's really cool how you guys do that.
That's all Dan.
Yeah, and what a great idea to engage your athletes.
So again, this is the different iterations of our shirts, and people know them, they recognize them. I mean, this with the aquatics removed, or even, different variations of it, but pretty much this, even with our swim school, they're downstairs, that's what's handed out. little swim school logo on the side, but the overall M, and as you saw within our logos, there's consistency through the logos. The gears remain always, the lettering, the type font, the machine, there's certain things that always, our team colors always remain. I never in my life thought I would have so much orange. We used to have an orange basement. That's no longer, but it's in that brand recognition. It is important, it's that card balance we feel, right? You want to have different shirts, but when it's too much all over the place and too many things, you get awareness. So there's a very big difference in business and marketing and building of brand awareness and IP, and understanding what that intellectual property is. So you may have a brand awareness because people have seen your logo, but is there a value in that property? And that's what not being all over the board and really being thoughtful and concise and knowing your path of where you're heading and in your strategic plan, you can build the value, not only of your IP as a company, but your personal IP. That was my big thing with ISL, right? Like hoping and making sure that our athletes understand that they have a value, that they have an IP. And I remember my very first conversation with Constantine was about that, and that's where we aligned, was the athletes knowing their worth. And the coach needs to know their worth. A club needs to know their worth.
For sure. And we're moving into protecting that brand, Paris.
Yeah, so this is a big one. I've definitely I do a lot of consulting with clubs, and different board of directors, and protecting your brand is really critical. So you build it, we are all guilty of it, and then you get lazy, right? Especially when you've been around for so long, you're like, we're here, we've done it, and we know who we are, so therefore everyone should know who we are, right? We learned, I'll share a quick story with you. We learned a great lesson within our own company, how Dan and I had actually kind of gotten a little lazy in this. We were provided an opportunity from USA Swimming, probably under Chuck Wilgus, that he was looking at a program with Mark Hesse and Tom Avicius within club development, coming out and spending time with the club, not just coming in for the afternoon, but spending 7-8 days with them and really getting down in the trenches. And we were fortunate enough that in the pilot program, and I think it was a fantastic program, they brought it to us. And so we spent 6 months telling our coaches this was coming. This isn't a bad thing. They're going to have total access. They're going to take everybody to dinner. They're going to go staffs. I mean, they had total access. And then they went through exercises with us as a full staff. And one of the biggest ones was, what does it mean to be machine, right? What does that mean? And so of course, Dan and I are like, wow, there's like our catchphrases, there's 7 words, right? There wasn't. There was like 19. And all of a sudden, Dan and I had to go, well, wait a minute, like we know what it means to be a machine because we talk about it every day, but clearly we're taking that for granted because our own staff, while they were consistent, they were not on target, right? So we had to step back and say, okay, what can we do to help our staff and to be better, to make sure we protect our brand? So that's one way, just by stepping, by getting lazy and not willing to look around, and it's so easy to do, especially right now with COVID, right? We're all in survival mode. We're trying to balance, we're trying to figure it all out, but don't be afraid to kind of step back and ask your staff. I think that's the biggest one, especially for the person who is the dry side operations. Even if you are on the deck, when we're on the deck, we're not necessarily talking about the business, right? We're talking about splits and times and, training plans and meets and all of that. But my analogy that I use a lot with my staff and in our family is that, here in this office, we're the architect. Looks great to me on paper, but you are the builder. And if it's not working in the pool and on it, I need you to let me know. Or if it's being perceived wrong, we can't do this without you. And so that's another big part of protecting your brand and making sure that you're creating a culture that the people who are on this ride with you feel valued and empowered to be a part and not be afraid to come to you, right? Like they need to be able to walk into your office and say, or pick up the phone or whatever, go have a beer and say, hey, this isn't working, and this is why. And I guess another quick one I can share that I've talked about, one of our coaches who's been with us since year 2. She's our site director. Fantastic coach. I'm terrified she's going to retire soon, Lynanne Nickley. And she came to me and said, I really, I can't progress the athletes the way I want in the current structure, and she was right. They were kind of hopscotching. They would go to here, go to another site, then come back. And I said, that's great, but guess what? I hear you, but making these changes is going to cost us about $25,000 to $30,000. And I gotta figure out, how to offset that, or what do we do? And kind of ultimately, I just don't see how I can make this happen. And she said, do you mind if I take a shot at it? Of course, have at it. Came back to me the next week. Not only did she solve it, not only did she cover the potential deficit, she increased it by 10,000. So, and I forever go back to that because I never saw that happening. And, I kudos to her for bringing it to us. And that whole delegating, and don't be afraid and to ask your staff and their strengths. She was the builder. She could envision and see what was happening in her playing field. And I was fortunate enough that we had created an environment that she felt she could come and be a part of that process. Prioritizing, gosh, as coaches, we're all terrible at this. We have, I'm going to turn my screen around for you real quick. So I'm sitting in our conference room. We have what we call our whiteboard. That is our walls in here are dry erase on purpose. Because when we come together as a staff, when we're in here, we put up things, or we talk about meets or our visions and our plans, but also especially kind of right now, coming into April, right? We're going to be focusing on next season. So we'll go through the exercise of all the things we want to change, which will be 50 things, right? And then I'll be like, okay, guys, what are the 5 that we really got to do? But they don't disappear, I guess is my point. When we call the parking lot board, they don't disappear. We still have things even from that report of Mark Hesse and Tom Avicius that every year I read it every year. And I'm like, are we doing this? Are we not? Or what's one more thing we can pull off the parking lot board to make good? By nature, a successful coach, I'm sorry, we all have egos. Egos are what make you successful. They're what drive us. I don't mean that in a bad way. And a part of that ego is wanting, we have a hard time saying no. I remember, and I'm certainly the pot calling the kettle there. I remember the first time Dan said to me, no is not a 4-letter word. But prioritizing what you need to be successful, and therefore your brand will be. And then the last 2, I really kind of talk about association within the community. A lot of times, especially for young clubs, shoestring budgets, we're looking for people to help us. We want to be partners in the community. Certainly was always our MO, that a school that asks us for something, we never say no. We may not be able to give a check, but we'll say, our budget is exceeded for this year, but how about we give you a swag bag that you can give away? Gosh knows we all have tons of stuff laying around, right? Give them a bag. We're a part of it. We're represented in the community. But then there are other things that will come to you that may not necessarily align with your brand. And I cannot tell you how many times we have been offered to have partners, or to lots of things that we've had to walk away from and say, you know what, this just doesn't align with where we are. And yeah, we could really use that, but we'll figure it out. We'll always figure it out another way. And I think that's really important. And again, to reference Chuck Wilgus, I mean, I learned a lot from him working underneath him. And that was one of the things that he would say is, does this align with where USA Swimming is right now? I remember when we were at a board meeting and Anheuser-Busch wanted to support trials. That was a big deal. Now we could talk about it. Back then we couldn't. And it really came down to, is our Olympic trials with a bunch of 18 and under athletes the place where Anheuser-Busch's logo needs to be? And even though they were offering us a lot of money, ultimately the answer was no. At that time, I know we have sponsors now, but and then again, as I said before, not being afraid to try something to build your brand, but also own it when it's not working. It will happen. It's happened to us. We've had partners, as I've talked about. We've had other things that, initially it's why operating agreements and understandings are so important. They're not there for when things are great. They're there for when we're not really sure. We don't have contracts for our coaches because we're just the way our state is organized, but we do have expectations from both sides, right? Here's what we expect from you, and here's what you should expect from us. And if we fall short of that, we want you to hold us accountable. So, don't be afraid to try something. And if it's not working, figuring out a professional way to exit it, with the least amount of drama and carnage that you can't. It happens. I mean, if you've been in business long enough, it's going to happen.
For sure. I should have called you last week because I just finished 2 mutual understanding agreements for some of the future things that we're doing. Yeah, you're right. I mean, those are all such important considerations. And one thing that my mind kept going back to as I listened to you explain that really eloquently was, are your expectations in line with your commitment? It's the same message that you're giving your athletes is the message that your business is run on.
Absolutely. And there are times, I mean, I'm not going to lie, ISL was a great experience. And we had, and as I'm re-engaging for season 3 and trying to figure out what that's going to look like, we had a meeting here within our senior staff, and said, okay, if I do this, these pieces are going to have to be picked up far more than I ever thought, right? I thought I was going to be able to balance it. And the next thing, I mean, no, I was gone. There was no balance. I mean, I check in with them, but came back to trust. I had to trust the people that were within our staff that, if they made a decision I didn't like, we're going to have to figure it out. People are going to mess up. We all do. And as long as our expectations are kept in line with our commitment, at that time, I wasn't fully committed to our company. I mean, I wasn't, right? I mean, there's only so much to go around. So my expectations had to be kept in line with what I was giving to our companies at that time.
So important to understand that, Paris, and that distinction is critical. And it's a great segue to my next question, which is, Paris is one person. How is the company organized? And, you travel a lot for a lot of the different things that you do and that you're a part of. So how important is it to build that trust in your staff? And what are some of the things that you're doing as a company to help organize all of these different pieces?
Absolutely. Well, and it's so different this year, right? In the pandemic. So before COVID, everything kind of came from our central offices. And Allison is here and Becky, who are literally, my left and right for within the team side. Obviously we have Dan. So the way that Dan and I are, just kind of broken up in responsibilities. It's funny. Everybody's like, oh, you're the CEO and he's the COO. I'm like, and I've even said this I'll be honest with you, it comes down to Mike Unger even, right? The COO is so much more important than the CEO. I mean, Dan is there. He's on the deck. He's really overseeing all the operations. He manages our coaches in that day-to-day development. Sure, we talk when we're looking at results and meets and qualifiers, and are we happy with how many qualifiers we had or not, or evaluating our overall performance is definitely a conversation that starts with Dan and I, and then brings in, the other people who are part of our senior staff. Within our performance center here, as I mentioned, we have Nancy Monahan, who's been with us for forever. We used to have, right before COVID hit, we had a director of operations, Brett Nickley, who's Lynanne Nickley that I already referenced, her son, not a swimmer, came out of college as a soccer player and started in between jobs. And next thing you knew, he'd been here for a long time. And then during COVID, decided to go be a real estate agent, which we fully support. His babies still come here for swim school. But having each division has a senior management team, and, again, pre-COVID. And so, monthly we would come together and say, okay, first Tuesday of the month is always our team meetings. Wednesday is swim school, I should say second Tuesday, sorry. Swim school, and again, pre-COVID, we have a lot of full-time employees. We have 13 full-time coaches. So our offices, we have cubicle offices behind me, we have our senior management offices, and then we have an open floor concept where we wanted everybody in here, right? Because it created a lot of synergies and a lot of ideas. And in fact, what we found was even part-time coaches would come by, and be like, hey, or every staff meeting is open to anybody who wants to come. There's some that are required, some that are not. But, to your question of like with me traveling, it's just a lot of communication. It's a lot of emails. And again, trust in everybody knowing what their responsibilities are. And I'll say I've really enjoyed this last year not traveling. I've started traveling again just recently, and I'm like, oh, I miss being home. I really have enjoyed. Obviously, I stepped down from ASCA, and season 2 for ISL was in Budapest. So I've really enjoyed being so fully ingrained in our own companies again. It'd been a couple of years. It was a lot going on, and but again, I'm really fortunate that I get to do what I do because of the support that we all have around each other. And that started, honestly, with my mother-in-law. I say that all the time. When my kids were little, if it hadn't been for her, I don't know where my career would be, because Dan and I could go and do at times what we needed and travel, and knew our kids were going to be okay. And we were very fortunate in that, and I give her that credit all the time.
Takes a lot of people to make even your average small swim team work, right? It takes a lot of extra people constantly.
Coaches' hours are they're not forgiving. They're not easy, and again, in pre-production, talking about you, right? We have small children, and I remember the time that Dan and I had to have that conversation of, at that time he was coaching primarily afternoons and evenings and late nights till 9 o'clock, but school times were coming, and I remember saying to him, if we don't start a plan now to get you out of those times, you're never going to see the kids. Like, you're never going to see any basketball games or never see lacrosse and so it was a conscious decision on our part to slowly, it was a 3-year fade out and searching for coaches. I remember we talked to you at one point about coming down,
I was this close. I
really, but and making that plan and recognizing, as I said, as coaches, we give everything, but we have to protect our families, right? We have to, and I hope that that's something that we've all learned out of this last year, is to take a break, and be okay putting boundaries. I think that would be the biggest thing I would share. In fact, Becky yesterday, who's fantastic, and it's crazy right now with meet entries and over the weekend, and parent had some questions, wasn't happy about something. And I said to her, you don't have to answer right now, but they'll keep emailing me. That's okay. That's why we have office hours. And you can email on Monday and say, thank you so much for your email. Apologize, I didn't get back to you over the weekend. Our offices were closed. And that's okay, because there's going to be so many weekends coming up where we've got meets now back, right? That we are going to have to be on. We're going to have to be monitoring everything, make sure. So you need to protect that time and take those breaks. That's probably the biggest thing that Dan and I've learned, in the 20 plus years of doing this. And these make us think that we're in an instantaneous society, right?
Exactly. And you mentioned something there that's so important for young coaches is you don't need to respond in the emotion of the moment.
Oh gosh, no.
You
So
know,
yeah.
give it a couple days, everything will be fine on Monday and you'll have time to respond reflectively.
Absolutely. So we have communication rules in our company. No lie. And they
I'm gonna write these down, Paris.
Yeah, I'll send them to you. I mean, but they are when to write, when to call, and when to do both. And underlying in all of that is what we, again, when we were all in the office, affectionately returned to step away from the keyboard. And you'll hear it because it's, especially if all of us have been CC'd on something and something crazy has come in, whomever reads it first, you'll hear somebody yell, "It's a step away from the keyboard, don't respond." Because especially for coaches, Dan, even any of our coaches, they're giving everything they have to these athletes. And so when a parent accuses you of not, it's an emotional, right? You feel attacked. You think about all the things you've given up within your own family to be there for this person's child. And in a lot of sense, a lot of coaches are spending more time with that children than their own family is. And so, if a parent is upset, we never respond. It's really funny, especially for me, when people send me just some of the scathing emails. It all happens. None of us are perfect. My running joke is I spend half my life apologizing and the other half signing checks. But that I do not, when somebody sends me that email, I call. And so when I say, "Hi, this is Paris Jacobs from Machine. I got your message. I just wanted a moment to chat with you." At least half of it, it's like, oh, I'm so sorry. I was having a moment. It was bad. It's disarming. Or they are still really angry, but we can talk through it, and believe me, I've had plenty of times in all of our years. I think we're up to like 12 now that where we have said to somebody, we probably aren't the place for you. And we can give you some numbers of some other clubs, and and not being afraid to say that either, that I appreciate that you don't like my response. You're certainly entitled to that. I'll always give everybody, and I say that even within our own Machine family staff, you may not like a decision that Dan and I make, but we will always tell you why. We'll always tell you the thought process behind it. We'll always be willing to talk it through with you. Doesn't mean that we're going to change our mind, but we are going to share with you why. And so, in those, if we have a parent who's upset, and we've kind of come to an understanding, then we always follow up with the email. "Thank you so much for your time today." Just to reiterate what we discussed, because 9 times out of 10 with a parent like that, it's going to come back. Sure. And you want to be able to reference, my staff teases me that I can be the queen of the passive aggressive email. I'm okay with that. Where, "Thank you so much for your email. As you will see in the email noted below." But we're all busy and it's not even intentional, right? It's just documenting and making sure that, especially again for coaches, you have so many swimmers that you see through the years and what's happening. And we're normal, we're natural. We can mix this kid up for another kid. I mean, shoot, I call my children 5 names before I get the right one.
I know.
So those are, that's kind of the backbone. I'm happy to send it to you. We do have it written out, it's just,
sure.
We have to have reminders of it, right? I mean, we are not perfect. My Lord, we make mistakes all the time. I think one of the things that Dan and I and all of us here try and pride ourselves on in our brand is that when we do mess up, we will own it. We're not, and that's one thing I will say to a coach as a parent all the time. I see it happen. We'll miss a kid swim, right? You're going to miss seeing that swim. It's going to happen. Maybe not so much now, but before, when we get back to normal. And when the kid comes up and you say, oh, it was great and all these things, and you start talking about things, as a parent, I'm going to tell you, if I'm in the stands, I'm watching my kid and I'm watching you and I'm watching both. And so if the parent sees that you did not even look at the water, but yet you just told the kid, you've just lost all your credibility. And so, that's a minor example, but a big one, I think too, right? Own that, you know what, I'm so sorry, I did miss it. Let me see if another coach saw it. How did you feel about that swim? Tell me what you were thinking, and talk through it that way versus, communicating something that may not be so, because you're trying to protect that you just made a mistake. We all do it.
For sure. For sure. I mean, that's a common one too.
And it can really harm your brand. It can
Oh, absolutely.
really harm your brand.
Credibility is gone 100%. Paris, I have two more questions for you, and they're kind of the big ones, but the first one has to do with the business end of things. What platforms does Machine use to keep the communication happening? Do you use Slack? Do you just text? What are you guys doing to stay in constant contact?
Oh, okay. So I think this is like, and Mike, you are so much better at this than Dan or I ever will be. So I'm going to put that out there right now. And like when Brett was here, I used to laugh because I'm like, this is my, like, that generation. Tell him and he'll tell me what to do. I have gotten better. I give all that credit to Kyle Mills at ASCA, who was like, I'm going to bring you in.
He is like incredibly impressive dude.
Yes. And so, to have spent 2 years working with him, and, he would show me all these different things. And it's really funny because when I go out to talk to people in our, my generation, Dan's generation, they're like, how do you know all these things? I'm like, not me, man, Kyle. And so then I come back to my staff and I'm like, have you seen this? What about Calendly? What about a doodle form? So, but every coach and site, especially this year, kind of has their own way. We communicate. Pre-COVID, it was a weekly email that came out every Wednesday. Parents knew it. It was all right there. Obviously, I mean, we're still swimming outdoors in 4 of our locations. We're all over the place. So everything is so site specific, especially since we span across 2 states. Our rules and guidelines are different. So a lot of that has fallen to our head coaches this year within the sites, to communicate internally. A lot of text messaging. We have a text thread that is all of our head sites and full-time staff, right? That's on that. And so, and again, our head site coaches are then empowered to, we've given you the information, you need to disseminate it with your staff and go over it. And that's the same way we actually do our reviews. When we do our year-end review, we have the primary supervisor, go over a review with the part-time coaches, or a junior coach or any of those things, and then bring those to us. And then we all look at it together and then look at it as a site. So it's a 3-part thing. Team Unify, we do use Team Unify. I think like all of us, there's frustrations with every communication platform right now that we wish could be better. And bridging the gap between, I think our biggest struggle, and I've got some great staff that help with that, is the kids communicate one way, the staff communicates another way, the parents communicate another way. So making sure that we're just saturating it, right? Every time I send something to the parents, I immediately go into our company list and I'm, guys, just sent to parents below, FYI. So, I mean, it's always a 2-step process so that our staff never feels blindsided by something that was sent to the parents. They need to know what's happening. And again, we're fortunate, we have offices. So we're starting to come back in here. Most of our staff has been vaccinated at this point. So, we're very fortunate in the state of Virginia that because we own our own facility and rent where we are the primary as the lifeguard, we're first responders. That's something that we fought very hard for with VDH, and very true, right?
Yes.
We would be the first ones to give CPR. So, and just a lot of openness. I mean, I really hate to say it that way, but it's just a lot of openness. And I've had to learn through the years, right? Just because I think I tell Dan, I thought it would get to this, or, and being aware that we all have so much going on. that it's better to overshare within your staff than to assume. And I definitely was victim of that. I definitely a lot of times assumed the staff knew things because I told a couple and I didn't tell everybody. And I learned the hard way. And so now I make sure, right?
Sure,
Make
sure,
sure
yes.
everybody's on the same page and everybody gets to know.
Paris, this is the big question here is, because you have such a good place to kind of a lens to look at our sport. What are you most excited about for the future of swimming in this country?
Wow. There's a lot there. I think, wow. I hate to say that I tie it back to a little bit of ISL, but I'm really excited to see, in season one, I did a lot with the contracts. I did a lot with recruiting, all of that, really setting up the behind the scenes infrastructure in the US side. I got to work very closely with all the GMs. And I really liked it and I loved it, right? I got to take my business side and the athlete side. I knew a lot of the athletes, obviously having done national team stuff too. So there was an element of trust there. I think the most exciting thing that I appreciate seeing right now, and it goes back to kind of where we really started with this, is the athletes owning their own IP and understanding that they have a value, and that our sport has a value, right? Like we've constantly, I don't get asked all the time anymore, when you say you do swimming, what's your real job, right? Like that we're starting to actually make true inroads and be a sport that is recognized. And of course, that's a Michael and Katie effect. That's a Bob effect. That's a Bruce effect. I mean, these people who have been out there as the primary coaches in a club level, right? The college side is a little bit different. But to be out there, I just think that the athletes having these opportunities, even if ISL, and this is not a prediction or anything like, but went away, right? Like if that wasn't there, I think the athletes recognize that what they do is pretty cool, even when they're training, and it gives them something to aspire to. I mean, we're at a tough time right now with seeing so many collegiate programs go away. And I know we're all committed to finding a path back, for them. So, I know that's not the typical, the games or, those things, but I think that's probably the biggest one. And then on the club side, and I was actually talking to Brendan Hansen about this the other day, as we're looking at some projects, that coaches are starting to own their own IP as well, right? That you're seeing more coach-owned clubs. And that's not a bad thing against a board run or a booster or any of those things. But, and if they're not coach-owned, those boards are starting to understand the value of the coach more than just being the person on the deck holding a stopwatch. And I hope that if I'm able to help progress anything forward, those are two things that I'm really, really passionate about, because making our sport professional, and I give Fitter Faster our look, David's a very good friend of mine. I mean, he, gosh, I've known David, I don't even know, I'm sure he'll call me after this and tell me the answer, but but I remember the first time I met David and he's like, I've got, we're going to do all these things. And I'd met him before, obviously with Gary and some other things, but I mean, he's done the hard work. He's put the brand awareness out there. He's providing a service to our athletes. He's bringing a level of professionalism to those that was there, but elevating it. I mean, we're just seeing
He's changed the game for those post-grad athletes. They now have an opportunity to earn money on a semi-regular basis or on a regular basis, depending on what they do for us here. And it just changed the game, like you said.
Absolutely. And or even, I mean, look at your guys' full-time staff, right? Or people who graduate out, right? That's one of our number one challenges when I was involved within USA Swimming More and then within the USOPC, and looking at that post-grad. I mean, even the foundation was looking at it, what happens when that athlete retires? What happens next? How do we, you guys are creating a platform that, really is, again, a business development, right? I mean, look at your staff. They're primarily all ex-Olympians.
Yeah.
So I just think it's so exciting to see professionalism. I think back to 2000 and 2001, and we literally were the sport that was talked about every 4 years. We were nothing more than when summer league rolled around, and you do what? You swim, so I think that's probably the thing I'm most excited about. And obviously I think that under the leadership within USA Swimming, ASCA, all these different things, we're going to see a great trajectory heading in, to LA and to the games. It's only going to continue to build.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Paris Jacobs, thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to have you stick on with me for just a minute afterwards to just give you some updates on this. But we certainly appreciate it. And we'll have this episode out for everybody on our website and on our YouTube channel. Paris, thanks so much.
I really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you to you and David.
Anytime.